So hi, we are here with Cavan Scott, writer for the High Republic. Welcome to Radio Tatooine.
Oh, it's good to be here.
How often have you been to Tatooine before?
Oh, I try not to. I keep getting dragged back. It's you think you get out and you keep getting pulled back in. You can't get away from the damn sand.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, you're of course mostly known for the High Republic, and I have to come clean right now. I'm an old fuck, and I'm saying this here on air. I grew up on Legends stuff. I had an Old Republic, and then Disney said, well, no. And so I kind of left the new canon that way. I did read stuff from the new canon. I tried to get into the High Republic. I think I read one of the comic books of the first ones, and it wasn't for me, and that's perfectly fine. Not everything needs to be for me. Basically, I think my first question, because of that is, and because other people who love the Old Republic, I have a lot of questions prepared for you upon people who love the High Republic.
Right, okay.
But my question to you is, why should I love the High Republic?
Well, I think you're right, to be honest, that not everything is... I think part of the reason, as fans, you have that feeling that you have to like everything and you have to get everything, and it's so easy to get burnt out because of that. And it's like, there are elements of Star Wars that I'm not particularly fond of, and I go, well, they exist. I think the problem is when you start getting to the region when you go, I don't like it, therefore no one should like it, So I think, first of all, it's absolutely fine not to like it, and we were very much prepared for that. For us, the High Republic was a chance to do something within Star Wars that hadn't been done in the EU. So I was a massive expanded universe fan as well, largely through the comics. Republic is still my favourite Star Wars comic of all time. And when I was asked to write Ventress and Dooku's story, that was my first source material I went back to. But yeah, it is a period of time, 200 years before the prequels, where the Jedi are at their height, the Republic's at its height. There is there are obviously Sith in the background, but they are very much in the background. And apparently the High Republic is a time for peace and glory, and yeah, that doesn't last. And so it was the ability to build a part of the universe that we haven't seen before, and to tell a story about Jedis when the Jedi are at their height, where the Jedi are... They're not just hidden away in a temple. They walk out with the people. Every major planet in the Republic, in its smaller era, has a Jedi temple. Well, as we find out in Phase 2, not everyone. There's a planet called Jeddah, which the Jedi aren't very welcome on. And that was very important for me. I love Jedi, but I have a problem when Jedi are all unknowing, or you can't know them. They're hidden away. They're cut off from people. I have a problem with monastic life in general because I don't think that's a way to be. So when we were creating this era, that was my main. I want to see Jedi who have to deal with things, and they have to deal with people. They know people. They have friends. And one of the best things for me in Star Wars is Obi-Wan walking to Dexter's diner, and the two of them, hugging and being friends. And that was one of my primary scenes for me. I want to see more of that. And see Jedi who struggle with being Jedi, and not in a dark side way, just struggle with the burden of being these champions of light and these peacekeepers for a galaxy. And so, yeah, hopefully that's one of the reasons I'd say to read this, because there's mayhem and there's death and there's battles and there's all that, but there's also at the heart very human characters, whether they're actually human or not, dealing with really extraordinary times.
That's an excellent sales pitch, I have to say.
Oh,
really excellent sales pitch. Now, of course, the High Republic is called the High Republic because the Republic, for once, is doing well, as you said. And I think that is an outlier nowadays, because we kind of spend a lot of time in the dark times. Now, Endor is, of course, a couple of days from releasing, but probably will long have been released by the time this goes out. But anyway, then in the sequel trilogy, we saw the New Republic being blown away with one single shot. And I always felt about that, well, you can't really do that. That's an awful statement on republics. And so I was wondering, I mean, generally, I think in the debate that I have followed on the High Republic, that people have said, well, it's more aware of its social context, of the time we live in. And I was wondering, did that play into the planning stages of the Is he saying something or not? No, just... No, okay.
Just doing it.
And so I was wondering, in the planning stages for the project, did that play a role to show a republic that actually can function for once?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was always part of the plan. obviously, there was a lot of people very concerned that this was going to be Star Wars without the wars. This was just going to be Star. And within this, we had to have periods where, so the Republic has been the High Republic for a while. The Jedi have been very good at their job. Jedi don't have to light their sabers in this era as we first start. And so they've become very used to walking in, because everyone knows who they are and everyone knows what they can do. They haven't had to use their powers. They haven't had to have some lightsaber fights. When you see a Jedi come in, you back away or you respect them. Suddenly they find themselves in a situation when there is a group of people who don't do that. And so what we wanted to do was show a functioning Republic, but then stress tested. And that's exactly what's going on. And we were wanting, like all great stories, and I think this goes right back to George at the beginning, we wanted to examine society through this thing, and think about societies who think they're at the pinnacle, and the hubris that comes from that. We talked about Camelot a lot, and we talked about Camelot from my point of view, the Arthurian Camelot, and also from the American point of view, the 1960s and JFK, and obviously how in 1960s America, it was a period at the beginning of the decade of great optimism and space race and JFK himself. But obviously there was a lot of people in that country who were struggling in those days as well. And then as the decade went on, you saw it unravel a bit. And that's what we were trying to explore. And the same way with the Arthurian Camelot, the Avalon, the great and good. And then what happens, when Arthur goes a bit off the rails. And so, yeah, that was very much in our part. But we did want to show, one of the things that the catchphrases in the High Republic is, "We are all the Republic." And we wanted to really explore what that meant for an organisation that is many cultures, and many different people together. And again, what would that mean to the Jedi? The Jedi who give up their culture from an early age. Where are their family? Their family are the Order, but if they live in these places, how much of that do they take? And so our Jedi are a bit more individual and individualistic in their view of the Force, in the way they dress, in their sabers. It's a time for the Order where they allow a lot more. They allow you to experience things a lot more. And then the fun is, well, how do we get to the prequels from that? So, and we obviously have certain Jedi, especially a little guy who speaks funny, who are the continuity between the two. So, yeah, that was always part of the story.
Right. Now, basically, what we're saying is it's about a community, and I feel that looking from the outside in as not being part of that particular part of the fandom, it's a very wholesome fandom. It's a very positive fandom. How do you experience this and dealing with the fans of the High Republic?
It's been great. So we obviously launched this in pandemic, and that was never the idea. None of the pandemic was an idea for anyone. We did the launch 2 weeks before lockdown. I mean, I was literally trying to get home after doing the launch because we didn't know what was going to happen. So we delayed it slightly and we launched during the pandemic, and I think we didn't know how that was going to go. But what actually happened was there was a group of fans who really needed something like the High Republic, and there was a very, a small minority voice that for once was very positive, and it was a great antidote to some of the other things we were seeing in fandom. And it's remained pure throughout that as well, and it's a community that tells us when they don't like things, but in a positive way, in a loving way. And that's what all of us want. It's not that we don't want criticism, we're writers. We can take criticism because most of the criticism's in our own heads anyway. And the joy of it has been now coming back to conventions and going to Celebration this last year in Anaheim was an experience because we had no idea really what response we were going to get. And we had a big panel and they took us into a room and we were like, "You've taken us into the wrong room," because it was huge and it's not what we're used to, a Celebration. We were brought on with all the lights on. We had no idea how many people in the room. Did the panel, live streamed around the world, which in itself was crazy, but you deal with it. The lights went back up and we realized that room was packed to capacity and there were people standing around the back. And we asked, how many people does this room sit? And they went 4,000. And it was like, what? They do realize this is for books and comics, don't they? And that response carried out throughout. You know, we did a cosplay competition, and we actually said to each other, no one's going to turn up, you know. And there were just people. Skier, who's one of my characters, a big Trandoshan Jedi. Someone had created an entire latex head-to-toe Trandoshan. It was incredible. It was, and we all got quite emotional for it. And then actually the pressure went on, because we realised that actually this has worked. This has been, you know, there are a group of fans who have really taken this to heart, and we'd heard loads of stories about people coming together and like families reading them together in lockdown, and a couple who are now getting, you know, they're now a couple because they met online through the High Republic. We've told them we want to come to the wedding. And so, yes, and now the pressure is to keep that going. But yeah, it's, as I say, I'm a fan. I know what it is like to be a fan. I know what it's like to be in a community. And I'm just very pleased that the High Republic has spawned this kind of group.
That's lovely. Now, you mentioned, indeed, you do comic books, you do novels, you do various types of literature. There was a podcast at Radio Tatooine where we talked about the High Republic when I think it was announced or shortly thereafter, and there was a big debate on, is this the right way to launch this without a multimedia element like Shadows of the Empire? I'm not sure how much aware you are.
I'm so aware of Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, and it played a huge role at this convention here, and it's much beloved still. And there was this fantastic soundtrack for it. Now, Ben, of course, did write music for the High Republic because he loved it so much. But we were wondering, was there ever a discussion on adding a multimedia element at the start somehow?
I've been campaigning for a soundtrack from the very beginning, because Shadows was massive for me in the 90s when the game came out, and the soundtrack. I still play the soundtrack loads, you know, as much as I play any Star Wars. I play so many bits of Star Wars music, but you know, and when I first got my record player back, I went back, and one of the first vinyls I bought was the Shadow soundtrack after having it on CD for years. Yeah, I mean, I have been pushing all the way through, and again, the pandemic had its benefits and its, you know, and its problems. And one of the benefits is that it gave us a pause. Everything was written, and so it wasn't the case of like rewriting those, but it gave us a chance to do more. So at that point, various other parts of Disney came in and said, "Oh, we would like to do we've got a graphic novel here with the Monster Temple Peak." That was something that happened during the pandemic when Disney Milan said it would be great to have a graphic novel, so we expanded it. The flip side is that some of the plans we had for other things couldn't happen because lots of things were scaled back. So there isn't an official soundtrack. We have unofficial soundtracks, which we've all taken to our hearts, and so in my mind, that's the soundtrack now. It's still growing, and it's now. I mean, and now we have Young Jedi Adventures has just been announced, you know, which has completely come out of the High Republic, and that for me is amazing that we've got something now that's sort of spanning. Some of the stuff we do in the High Republic is very much aimed at adults, and now we've got something that probably the most targeted at very young fans, and I'm so proud that it's the High Republic because again. It's hopefully going to get another generation of kids excited about Jedi and who perhaps aren't even old enough to watch the films yet. And then if they then come through the High Republic and we've got levels of books that they can then go and read, you know, the kids' comics and read the kids' books, and then when they get a bit older, read the YA novels. That was always part of the plan. And now that it's spanning into things like that, and then you've got the other scale, you've got the Acolyte, and it's amazing to see that all spawn from what we were doing. And as for soundtracks, I'm still banging that drum repeatedly.
I'm hoping for it. I absolutely love the Shadows of the Empire soundtrack as well.
Yeah.
One thing I noticed, you mentioned kids right now. We have a booth here. We have these bookmarks for the High Republic made up, and I know you signed quite a few of them over the past couple of days. And we noticed at our booth that kids very much respond to that. And I think you are building a new generation of fans right there, and that must be incredibly fulfilling from your point of view because you're basically shaping the new generation of fans.
I mean, it's that thing when people say they're humbled. I actually try, you know, it's not just being humble. It is an honor, you know, and there's no point having false modesty about it. It's an absolute honor and daunting in its own sense. So it's that thing, like I was saying about celebration. You're pushing yourself now, and yeah, seeing kids picking up like Justina's first book that she did. I mean, Justina knows how to write for children. She's been doing it a long time, and so we knew that part was in safe hands, going into it, and see people respond, and then on the following books as well. It's been great. I mean, I had two daughters, a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old, who at the time of Rebels were just the right age. They discovered Rebels without me pushing it on them by themselves. And then the time that Force Awakens came out, oh my God, were they ready for Rey? And it's still my now 16-year-old who has her room she's at drama school now. She's got a very emo room with lots of like black and stars and things. She still has her Rey poster over her bed. And when I talked about redecorating her room the other day, she was like, Rey's going back up. And so it's seeing it through their eyes, So my two daughters, Rey will always be our hero. And I think, they look at Rey as I look at Han and Luke, and another generation look at Obi-Wan and Anakin. And so, it's a wonderful feeling to know there will be people who their first experience really will be, our characters. Will be these young Jedi who are struggling and doing, living like kids, just as the young Jedi Academy books, back in the day were as well. And hopefully they'll grow up with us. Those characters are going to move up, and that's part of the plan, is that characters we introduce as Padawan we're going to see as Jedi, so they will be able to grow with these characters. And so it's wonderful. I love it.
Now, I know we're running short on time, and I need to get to some of the questions that were prepared for me by our Philip, who absolutely loves the High Republic.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to get this right. I'm going through some of those at least. He mentioned that obviously Star Wars stories oftentimes end on a hopeful note.
Yes.
And you didn't with The Rising Storm, where you ended with the face collapsed in on itself, the entire husk crumbling to dust before his eyes, and for the first time since he was a child, Stellan Gaius was afraid.
Yes.
That is a pretty sorrowful note. Personally, it reminds me a little of the Revenge of the Sith novelization, which we have to name drop in every of our book club
because
podcasts.
It's the greatest of all time.
And the darkest, generous, and patient, and it always wins.
Yeah.
So I was wondering, why end on such a sorrowful note here?
Because that was the job of that story, So we've planned, we've got a 5-year plan for this story, and very definite points along the way that we have to hit. And when I went into writing The Rising Storm, one of the points I had to hit was Loden's body being discovered, and that was all part of the story, and it's part of an ongoing story. So there is still hope, and hopefully in that book there are elements of hope, but that wasn't what that book needed to do, because it was setting up. If you think about Rising Storm in a film point of view, it wasn't even the break into the second act. It was right at the beginning of the first act. The first book and the first comics, Light of the Jedi, around that are the pre-title sequence, if you want to talk in James Bond terms. The Rising Storm is kicking the story off, and I think that's surprised people, because they saw the books as a trilogy, and they thought it was going to be a one and done story. No, we're talking 5 years here. So it's one step along the way, and hopefully as people come with us or rediscover it later, or come back to it in years to come, they'll be able to now see that's why that happened there. I'm a horror writer as well. That's my background. That's what I do. Hope is very much a part of horror, and Joe Hill was talking about it recently in an interview, that without hope you don't have horror. You need to believe the characters are going to get out. Otherwise there's no point reading or watching a horror story. And sometimes they do, and sometimes you don't. In that particular story, that character didn't. But a lot of people talked about his Padawan and how he, I wanted to give a little bit of hope in that situation. And again, sorry if you've not read it, at the end of there's a little bit of spoilers, he gets to be with his master one more time before a dreadful thing happens to his master. But those moments he has with his master are going to see him through his life. Because originally my idea was that he found the body. And I was like, I can't do that to him. I can't have that being the last time he sees him. So there is hope there. It's just hope that's setting up stuff for the future.
All right. Now you mentioned a 5-year plan. Mm-hmm. That reminds me of another book project, and I need to name drop it because right now on the Radio Tatooine Book Club we are actually going through the new Jedi Order book series.
Yep.
and we haven't even made it to balance point yet, if you remember that, because we are taking basically 6 hours per book. It's been a great ride so far, and actually rooting for someone to do that with the High Republic, I think that would be awesome as well. I was wondering, was any of that an influence, or are there still people around who made the experience of making these multi-year books back in the day for Star Wars? And is their experience coming down to you guys?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, we've got people like Pablo and, who work on Story Group who are... So many people don't understand what Pablo does, and what his role is, and what his love of Star Wars is. I mean, the man is an encyclopedia. He literally wrote the book on the expanded universe, novel writing. And so he was drawing on experiences of New Jedi Order. And from the flip side, people like me and Claudia were the experience of reading the New Jedi Order, So it was, we've had two sides, people who worked on it and people who enjoyed it, and then people who have come to it fresh, but actually know through other publishing strategies or other publishing initiatives how these kind of things work. So it's been a real melting pot of different ideas that have led to it. But one of the things we wanted to say was, there is the infamous whiteboard, which I spend far too much of my time talking about, seeing that...
Because of the dinosaurs.
Seeing it was actually, we spend more time on it now than we did at the moment we were writing it. But one of the things that is on there, that we underlined on there, is one of the things we said, whatever the story is, we want to know what the ending is, so everything has been planned with the ending in mind. And so to try and land that ending. There is a very, very definite plan for this entire storytelling, and we're very happy that it looks like, obviously because of the way it's been taken on, that we're going to be able to see it through to the end.
Now we're running very short on time, so I'll end with a final question. Next year, a YA novel of yours will be released within the High Republic. If I understand Philip's question right, that is a pretty new thing for you within the High Republic, at least, right?
Yeah, I've not written a YA novel from the High Republic.
So, is there a special challenge to that, and what can readers expect from that YA novel?
Well, I can't talk too much about the book. I'm going through the edits when I get back to the UK after this convention. It's the challenge. I've written stories for preschool, I've written stories for adults, and you treat story in the same way. It's the lens of how you see the story and you present the story. So I think people, if you don't read YA, have a very skewed idea of what YA is. And, it's young adults. The adult is right there in the title. And again, with all these things, you just take responsibility how you put the story across. But YA novels do give you a chance to tackle more, difficult themes than, say, a middle grade novel would say. There's always a challenge, and I like the challenge of going from age group to age group because it does just stretch you. What you can expect, so I can't say much of it, but if you've read some of my other entries into the High Republic, I'm not very too far off that path. It's very much in keeping with the stuff I've been doing, but there is hope, I promise you.
That's wonderful. Now, are there a couple of final things you want to tell people who love the High Republic, who may not yet love the High Republic? I think we need to wrap it up on that. So, do you have anything to pitch, or do you have anything to give out or to say?
Well, there are loads of jumping on points. If you want a good jumping on point and you like comics, I'm a comics guy. I've been writing the Marvel comic. It's a comic about a young Jedi who is very overwhelmed of being a Jedi and her experience with her master, and trying to tell a story about a master and an apprentice after she gets made a Jedi and how that would go. That was very much set as an idea of jumping in. The great thing about this convention, I've had so many people turn up to me and say, I now read comics because we read that comic, which for me is like, that's the best thing in the world, Yeah, give it a go. And as I said at the beginning, if you don't like it, you don't like it. There is plenty more Star Wars, and but yeah, just know that we're all doing this through a love of this universe that we are privileged to be a part of. And if you like Easter eggs of the EU universe, definitely read my books, because they say at Lucasfilm they know that I've got a list of stuff that I'm trying to recanonize, and they've totally rumbled me on it, because that's absolutely true. So yeah, I try and put as many Easter eggs as I can to the Old Republic and to the old canon, because in my mind it's all just Star Wars, and from a certain point of view.
From a certain point of view. That's a wonderful sentiment. Thank you very much, Cavan Scott, for
Thank
being
you.
with us today. And yeah, I hope to read some of you in the future. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I hope this wasn't too painful for you.
It's fine. It was lovely. Thank you.